we continue on talking about things and important moments in our history. Every once in a while, we get something that just kind of just changes the world. And we're right now in the middle of an epic internet quake of potential and all sorts of things. But it's happened before. And not only did it happen before, so this is, I have Lisa McSherry, one of the original gangsters of the virtual pagan world, was the first ones to actually really use the name, not just coincidentally, not just accidentally, but intended to. And we met in the chat rooms of AOL so very long ago. So so Lisa, come on board, and I'm glad to be interviewing you and talking with you. Really, this is more of a talk than the idea of an interview. Um, but fill people in. People, I realize a lot of people when I mentioned Lisa McSherry, they kind of like, huh? And some of the older ones scratch their heads, but you've come on.
I like to call myself the most prolific unknown author on topics of religion, spirituality, and witchcraft in particular that you pretty much ever meet. I've been doing this for a really long time. My first article was published in Pangea magazine in 1999, I think it was. Bless Ann Niven for taking on so many new writers as she's done over the years. But my
Mhm.
big thing has actually been the intersection of online dynamics, group dynamics, and spirituality, and how we can do this virtually. And so, yes, I was the first person to say, hey, I'm a virtual pagan, which is
Mhm.
a phrase not a whole lot of other people use. They mostly say techno pagan or maybe cyber pagan or things like that. Techno shamanism is another phrase I've kind of heard out there. And
Oh,
those are
sure.
nice, those are good terms, but I basically see everything I did physically back in the day for the 20 plus years that I practiced before I got online
Mhm.
is completely portable to what I now do online, which I have done now for I mean, 30 I
So,
guess formally 1997. I started my own coven in 2000 and it's still
mhm.
going.
Yeah.
Um, so
So,
yeah.
because it was forming the same right around the time of the Daily Spell, which was ours, and the idea that would be in 2001 would become the formulation of Witch Call, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
you were forming covens, and you had a huge influence on that because one of the books that we gave, would give out, and we would talk about, and the essays would be about this idea of virtual pagan because everybody wanted to do ritual. To this day, we still do ritual online, but it was that your movement in 97, 98 really kind of gave people a framework. Can you talk about that framework that was part of that first book, the first kind of realization of ritual online? Because I still think it's a framework that we use today.
It is. And the thing is, this is the wonderful thing about your basic neo-pagan framework, right? It's a set ritual. It's got, your 6 steps or 8, if you really want to drill it down a little bit, that are common and typical and kind of everyone knows what they're doing. And back in the day, okay, just to give new listeners, people who didn't know what it was like back when we were first doing ritual online, we are talking about literally doing a text ritual.
Yes.
Okay, so the chat rooms were very literally a group of people would get into a channel, IRC channel, AOL chat room, and type their lines to cast a circle, create sacred space, do ritual, and so it was all typing. So it's so different now because I got to tell you, Zoom makes ritual fantastic. It's been one of the biggest step forwards in terms of online ritual period that I've ever seen. And but back in the day, I was doing online ritual. I belonged to a group of people and we were doing Sabbats, we were doing initiations, and I was finding that if you could visualize well enough and if you could create an atmosphere well enough with the words, you got magic. You
Hmm.
sensed energy. You could feel these bonds creating and things shifting. And when we did magic, spell work, and it worked. I mean, proof is in the pudding. It's like okay, it works. You send healing energy to someone in a focused way and they got better. Well, that's magic. People needed help for abundance or money or fertility. Boom, it was happening. Not everything does in physical world. Um, and it was working. And I'm a big fan of, well, if this works, then let me get other people on board, because
Hmm.
there are so many people who are in places where practicing a non-organized religion, never mind witchcraft, but anything non-organized, is severely frowned on to this day. And it was even worse in some ways, I think, back in the turn of the century. And find these people, give them an out, give them a place where they can create their own spirituality and
Hmm.
talk to deity or not.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about something that we did very early on that really had an impact in the world, that we helped out another one, Abby Willerwood. Goddess
Yes.
2000 project. People
Yes.
don't, we don't realize that for me and for you, Lisa, this is like our test crowd. It was one of those big, because Abby put out the artist. So let me go ahead and let me pre this. And basically, 98, Abby Willerwood received a message from the gods. Create goddess art for 2000. And who are the artists? Anyone who can pick up a crayon. And she wanted to get this message out. And she created a website called, it's for Spiral, and she started organizing local coordinators that she never met. And she was doing it with email groups. We sent it out through the Daily Spell. You were talking about it, giving them rituals they kind of do, and we facilitated this. That eventually would be produce over almost a million. If they ever go to the goddess art, there will be all this art in '99 and 2000. It was over a million pieces, and we basically proved some of the prototypes of how a scattered community. They were in 65 countries. They had over 100 and something groups. And a lot of this was based on Nabu Willer's vision. But Lisa and I were working hand in hand in very different ways of developing that story. And that was our first real, I think, test of the idea of the macro community. And it was very temporary. It was a
And
very
reaching multiple communities, reaching communities that you wouldn't
temporary.
otherwise talk to. And oh yeah, there were a number of people I became friends with that I still talk to this day, in various and different ways. And there was this wonderful concept of touching other people, and through that doing magic somehow, either community magic or literal magic. I mean, Abby Willowroot was very much literal magic. We really
Hmm.
need another Goddess 2000. We really need a Goddess 2025. I'm not taking that on. Let me just say that now.
No.
um, but with some that sort of level of creativity and activity and sharing that was kind of going on was phenomenal. Um, and I remember there were a lot of people. Here's a touch of negative, but there were a lot of people who were like, "You can't do magic online. It doesn't work that way." And uh, one of my concepts that I sort of gave out there is, well, why is the cyberspace energy different from the astral realm? And I've yet to have anyone actually tell me why it's different. They will give different analogies and such like that. But I was like, yeah, but when I go to cyberspace, I'm literally in between worlds. I am untethered from the physical, and my computer is allowing me to access this if I want, but it's all energy. So why won't it work other than disbelief?
Well,
And yeah, go ahead.
in cyberspace is psychic space. I tell people all the time, it's an imaginary realm that is conceived by stimulating electrons, right? That is out there, and then we have to use word code, whatever way you want to call it, symbolism, language, to create spells that create objects in imaginary space that we all interact with, and we know those objects are real because we're sitting here in the middle of a restream, in the middle of creating a TV studio that was, we're halfway a world apart, and now we're talking to everybody in the whole world simultaneously that wants to pay attention. So
Mhm.
that's where we've come with that. So cyberspace and psychic space are the same. It's imaginary realms, and that was one thing you did. So in the last note, so we talked about all the nice connections of it, but it was the first time we utilized a series of hyperlinks to create a directory. Right
Mhm.
out of that same period of time, you would see Witchfox come in. But the
Oh
Goddess,
yes.
but the Goddess 2000 project was something that we worked on together. Was the idea of the first hyperlink directory that allowed people to get connections into their local groups. I mean, we
Mhm.
had seen a little bit of that, but that was the greatest accomplishment of Goddess 2000 because it gave birth to a lot more of those ideas.
Mhm.
You know,
Absolutely.
and
And
simultaneously.
of course the actual World Wide Web browser technology,
Hmm.
Netscape and things like that. That was 1995. That was
Hmm.
right in there that we were, we could suddenly find each other without having to go through FTP
Right.
or, ICQ, groups
Yeah.
and not
IRCs.
ICQ.
Oh yeah.
Well, always IRC, yeah, absolutely. But
Wait.
Usenet, the original Usenet, before Usenet was all porn, Usenet was actually useful,
It
and
was.
how we reached each other.
And so then right around that turn of the century, we start seeing the larger internet. We saw Witchfox form up. We saw the Goddess 2000 come and go. We saw Witchcool come up, and and yours was uh, Cyber Jaguar. Your coven really took off.
It's Cyber Coven, actually, cybercoven.org, which still exists,
Cyber
and then
Coven
the
data.
Coven is actually Jaguar Moon.
Okay, so I
So
kind of
yeah.
merged those two ideas. No, but Cyber Coven was something that you formed up, and I think you gave a lot of. So we talk about frameworks. I think you gave a very strong framework for everyone to kind of deal with. And that was the idea of the human side of it. So I can't, that's the biggest thing that I can't ignore is that how correct you were on the human side. Technology changed and you gave them all the adaptability, you gave them all the outside thing. But that core that remains today that I think I need to get to you, we need to really kind of get you back and revisiting that is that human core, which is now the only thing that's going to be left to what we're doing online because we're now living online. When you did it in 98, 99, I was still, I had a boss that said to me, oh, that internet thing, no one's ever going to really monetize it. He went out,
Wow.
he went out of business 6 months later because Petco moved into the area of his very exclusive three pet shop chain, beautiful chain, but he got eaten.
Yep.
Um, So, okay, so we got cyber covenant. So, what is cyber covenant? What is really the idea behind? Can you really operate? And the answer is yes. But back then, people didn't believe this. They were like, "Ha, huh?" Can you talk about that? About and how you stuck with it?
Well, I did. Partly I stuck with it because I'm stubborn. That's a reality. Is I'm a real stubborn person. If it works for me, I'm just going to keep talking about it. I can have an audience of one. If I've changed their life, great. I've done my job. I have a very strong sense of service to my community, and like all my projects, sort of end up under that rubric, if you will. But I also think it's important. And honestly, up until the pandemic hit 3 years ago, this month, really, or we started taking it seriously, there were still a lot of people who respected me as a witch, worked with me as a witch, and knew what I was doing and how I was going about doing it, but still really couldn't grasp this idea of doing ritual, for example, online or gathering together in communities and working magic. And how could you have a coven of people online? After 20 plus years, I'm sort of like, well, why wouldn't you? It, it's just there's so much more out there. I'm about to get really passionate about this. It's easy to find information online nowadays. It always has been. Finding good information is a little tricky, but when you reach out and you make a connection to somebody and want to work with them, then it's very similar to working with them in physical space. You make a connection, you see if you like each other, you decide what the parameters are of your relationship, you decide what you're going to do together, and then you figure out how you're going to do it. And magic and ritual in physical space operates like that, and that's how you do it in virtual space. and even more so nowadays with actually being able to see each other rather than just typing words. You can there's really strong connections that are made, and it's getting better and better year by year. I mean, the one real problem, and I think you guys know this in witch school in particular, is time zones. You can't break the fact that, for example, my coven still does all of its rituals and meetings and such at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And for most
Mm-hmm.
of the year, that's 2 a.m. for Portugal. So I get up at 1:30 in the morning to be with my people and work with them. And I'm not a night person. I'm
Yeah.
very much not a night person. It's very difficult. But I see them, and I'm
Mhm.
having an incredible connection with them, even though I am literally 6,000 miles away.
I think that's important. So one of the things I'm dealing with is that the Pagan World Project, which is, as you know, as people have heard, just went independent this week, just in top of Chat CPT 4, and it's really about
Congratulations.
and it's about cyber techno. Yeah, Wood School and the Corellian tradition are in great hands. It's gotten to the point where they're turning me into an administrator, and I'm a terrible, terrible administrator. Um,
You've been promoted up too far. Oh
oh
no.
no, and so they've graciously allowed me to kind of move away from that to do the Pagan World Project, which is for me the same thing, same message, same duty, same action. It's no different than everything we've been talking about. So, so we've talked a lot about your virtual stuff, but let's talk a little bit about outside your virtual stuff. You're like a prolific writer. You can go to Lisa McSherry and see all her stuff. Let's talk about your writing. So you said, because that's got to take a real persistence.
Yes, it does. Particularly since I'm not best-selling pagan author, so convincing publishers to actually publish my things is always a little bit of a no, you really want to do this, it'll be great, and everyone loves my writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually I'm going to take a moment to thank every single person who has bought one of my books over the years, and in particular those saintly ones of you who have actually written me reviews, because y'all have made it very, very clear you like my work and like my writing, and that's very gratifying as a writer, because I don't do it for the money. um, Way back in 2000, I wrote the book, The Virtual Pagan. And it was literally at that time very much a primer on even how to get online, which can be kind of hard to imagine from this vantage point. But I literally was telling people, this is the hardware that you need. You need a modem. You need to have a
Mm-hmm.
dial-up service. You need to be able to dial in and reach these places. And once you're online, this is where you will find groups of people who are interested in being pagans. One of them was Witchbox, for example. But also, actually, back in the day, to have a little callback, there's a search engine called Avatar Search. And that was a brilliant collection of pagan specific resources and websites. It made it so much easier to find things,
Mm-hmm.
share information. I really miss Avatar Search, actually,
Mm-hmm.
almost as much as I miss Witchbox. Anyway, so back then my book was literally about how to get online, how to maneuver, and then how to be a good person online, how to be a good pagan, yes, how to do magic, how it works to do magic online. Literally about how to get online, how to maneuver, but also the sort of etiquette of being online, talking about flame wars and how to avoid them, and how you are coming across in text is so very different from how you come across in person, and that's why you can get into conversations with people. Um, and that book is well out of print now. And a couple of years ago, actually, I redid it. So the Virtual Pagan 2.0 is out there, available mostly through Kindle and Barnes and Noble. It can be hard copy, not just on electronic.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a massive revision, because after basically 20 years, there's been a lot that had changed on the online landscape, including the fact that we weren't doing things just by typing anymore. Still has most of the original material, just updated. What my biggest update were two things. One was talking about security,
Mm-hmm.
which I did do in the first book, but it's shifted so much now. I mean, the level of
Mm-hmm.
scams and phishing and identity issues and privacy issues have gotten so much more complicated. And I really had a lot and still have a lot to say about protecting yourself being online. We It's almost impossible to be truly anonymous nowadays, for example. So there are risks that are associated, and I talk about that. But then
Yeah.
also I talk about social media because no one saw social media coming. Yes, some people saw how to monetize the internet and websites and things like that. No one saw Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, no one. And it has vastly changed how we interact with each other
Well,
in so many ways.
and so I think that's true of right now. Let me go ahead and say CGPI 4.0. I've been working on it the last 24 hours. This reminds me of the chat room. This reminds me of emails coming in affordably. Reminds me of the one list groups. It reminds me there's no way exploring any change you've ever talked about that upholds something really fast. I think we're in that moment right now again.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I think the only way you get it is through context. I mean, we have context of how these changes are.
exactly.
My biggest mistake with because my stuff started right around the same time as Google, and one of the early things I did was invest ad space for Witch School into Google. The number one mistake is I spent any other set on advertising anywhere else but Google at that day. So I was getting Witch at nickel a cost, 10 cents a cost. I mean, at that time, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how we expanded out to a worldwide system on the back of Google's expansion early on, and we're
Right,
still.
right.
And our SEO is still very strong because of that. So anyone who wants to get in there and say, "Oh well, everybody's already doing it," that's not true. It's as fresh a market today as it has ever been.
It is. It always is. And there's new ideas and new people coming up with things. I mean, like,
Mhm.
I don't even dare talk about things like Discord and Mastodon, the new things that are coming and that's practically like this week, that
No, this
Discord
is
is no
we're not.
longer. But
So you and I have had one other thing we were hit with, and I don't think it was ever true, as in the way that people think is that we've been hit with the title of futurists. That we are the futurists. You know this is true. This is like one of those things. And we were never really talking about the future as so much as the now. We were always talking about this isn't tomorrow. Emails right here. One list is right here. They're getting video ready. We weren't making the reason we were accurate to the degree that we've been accurate, and why I think there's another round of us for us is that we aren't reported. We never reported on the future. We kind of said this is coming down the pipeline, but this is what's here today. Like your text based chat rooms for rituals. Now we do it in Zoom. We can do it in all other spaces. But if we hadn't built that ethnic and, like you said, that etiquette, which I think greatly impacted my own tradition as well as others, right? We wouldn't be here today. So
exactly.
once you, instead of me expounding upon this, because they always hear me, why don't you kind of explain where your philosophy of where we came from and where we're going to, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm actually not sure I have one right now. It's been a very fluxy couple of years. And like you
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm not actually much of a futurist. Although one thing I will stand on a little bit is back when I first wrote the Virtual Pagan,
Mm-hmm.
I said we can have virtual communities. We can have
You
cyber
did.
communities. We can create this if we want to. And a lot of people poo-pooed me, but here we are and we're doing it and it
Mm-hmm.
is happening. And I'm also fascinated to see, by the way, so many organized religions climbing on board doing virtual get-togethers and gatherings because they have to,
Mm-hmm.
and with all the same learning curve of, oh, how does this happen, how do you do communion for 50 people who are in 50 different homes, well, okay, let's talk about that. So, that
Mm-hmm.
part of me was futuristic in
You
view.
were.
in which school saying, no, no, we can do this. We can have a huge school and teach people real
Hmm.
things and create a growing, tradition and community. And people went, ah. And oh, and here's the best part. Of course, you and I both have said all along, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune.
That's it. Hmm.
You don't have to pay $10,000 to become a witch, which or whatever thing is out there of you
Hmm.
don't have to do a healing for $300. There's possibilities that when you work it on your own. Anyway, so right now, wow, right now it is really fascinating because I actually think the social media networks are are going to change dramatically.
Oh, I agree. So,
I don't know what it looks like, but they're going to
mhm,
change really fast because their making money model is not sustainable. And
mm-mm.
with the crash of cryptocurrency, um, I think there's some real big changes that are going to happen here in 23, 24.
So I've got some very strange things I'm going to tell people. My new company is all about building robots for the pagan community. And I mean that. I mean that earnestly. If they go, "What do you mean?" I said, We're going to need an army of robots." So for me, we're taking the plunge. There's a site called Magic.ai that's going to open. They're like kind of putting out our suites. I don't have a clue who they are. I'm just working my way up the waiting list, to kind of flex. But I am doing this. So this, let me give you a concept. This is something we talked about early on. This is a social transmitter. I've built a social transmitter that allows me to go across platforms in the metaverse to broadcast live at any time. This site, this piece here can go is 24 hours a day. And if there's a real emergency, anyone with a cell phone camera, smartphone camera could be one of my reporters and we can be on the air in 15 minutes. So protest and things, this is now the next step of that. So kind of this idea of self-awareness. So the thing is, I really am glad to be talking to you is that you're right. I'm not saying that we're not futurists in the sense of that we didn't predict things. We did. We actually saw things going out there, but it's not always been area, out there in that sort of world. I think that it has been like grounded into the moment, the tea rooms, the forums, your
Yes,
chat.
I was just thinking we were always rooted in what was happening in the moment
Hmm.
because we're not about, well,
Yeah.
I'm not. You are actually. You're far more cutting edge than I am. It amuses people who know me because I'm
Hmm.
actually not all that technologically advanced. I will never be a beta user. I like it
Hmm.
to be tried and true, and I take it on real slowly, and I try to break it apart before I tell anyone about it. And we were incredibly late, for example, in like the class I teach, the art of ritual. We were incredibly late in adopting Zoom. We literally, that was 2015 before we came up with it, and Zoom had been around for almost 2 years prior to that. But I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be the dud of AOL chat rooms, or Skype,
Hmm.
because people had been telling me about Skype for years. And every single time I got on a Skype call, I was like, it breaks up, it drops, it's unusable. I'm not going to do ritual where we're getting interrupted because people are dropping in and out every 5 minutes. We've already got that issue on IRC. So let's
Right.
just, stick with
Yeah.
what we're
And I feel like we rituals should be kind of smooth and efficient and all that, and not like a séance. I mean, are you there? Is Mary there? Can we hear Mary? Okay, good. We hear Mary's voice. Okay, everybody else going there? Who's that? What's that's
with. Oh yeah, or even worse, there's someone whose name is there as if they're there, but they've in fact dropped, and they've got the next part, and so
okay.
you're like,
So let's talk about this. So when the ritual's happening, you have to be kind of go with the flow because you've got this extra layer on the world, this sort of neurosphere we call it now, of this ritual happening.
Mhm.
But the connections can be really spotty. And I have heard over and over again people who do it says, yeah, my phone, my camera was working way ahead of time. It was working afterward, but when they were doing that ritual, and so that's one of those moments where people get really kind of that energy work, that energy work in there. Can you talk about how to ground a little bit? I mean, one of the things you can tell to us is about how to ground when you're doing these sort of hyperelectric rituals.
Oh yeah. It is interesting and fascinating how the experience can be incredibly different between people. So mentioned before, I teach a class every year. Every single year I bring new people who may have done ritual but have probably not done virtual ritual, into my energetic sphere, if you will. And the first ritual we do of the year is janky, energetically speaking, because they don't know what to do. They're pushing too hard, they're pulling, they don't know how to connect. And so the role of the lead very much is pull all that in. And I always have the rest of my coven members paying more than usual attention to holding the energy. No one gets to relax once you're in the coven. No one gets to relax at the first ritual because it's hard with the new people because they just don't know what to do. By the second ritual, they're much more comfortable. By the third one, they're rocking and rolling because they know how it's supposed to be to their best ability. People have different abilities energetically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the way we always set it up is there is a lead and there is a second. And the second's job is to, how do I want to put this best? To act as the focus, sort of the
Mm-hmm.
last lens before the energy goes to the lead, so
Mm-hmm.
that if there's somehow a drop, like for example, someone gets dropped,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have you know, a wobble, if you will, in the energetic sphere, uh, and so everyone's doing their job, but the lead and the second are really paying attention to the
Mm-hmm.
energy, as is typical for physical ritual, right? There's
Right.
the high priestess, generally speaking, and then the second, whoever that is. As a note, by the way, my coven has actually done away with gendered titles for rituals.
Mm.
The person who is leading the ritual can be either any all genders. Their
Mm-hmm.
title is lead, and
That's
they're
very
the
interesting.
director. Yeah, that is their role, is they're directing, they're leading the group, and then the second is their backup, and then other people may take other roles as necessary for different things. So where was I talking about energy? So yeah, we teach people how to do the energy, and what I like to, the simplest example I like to give is, okay, you're in your private personal space, your physical space, and you cast your own circle. Don't call deity, just cast your own circle. Okay, now when we all get together in ritual and this one particular point, I want you to imagine your sphere of personal sacred space connecting with other people's personal spheres, like soap bubbles. And then the soap bubble gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what we're doing. And you may not feel it the first time, but you will the second time. So just do your best to imagine that's what we're doing, because that's the imagery I'm using. And with each person that comes in, there's a
Mm-hmm.
soundless snap, if you will, like popping a
Gotcha.
plastic bubble.
So, yes. Wow. I'm so that is so thing. But let us go ahead. Let us go ahead and talk about the next piece of your books. Let's talk about your non-virtual pagan books. So we started out
I
there.
non Okay, so there I am. I've written the Virtual Pagan. I'm talking about online dynamics and how people are getting along. And it suddenly occurs to me that we in the pagan community do not have a book of group dynamics. We are always having to look to the business world or outside our community for how to get along with one another, and in particular, how to deal with conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I came up with Magical Connections, which is really old at this point. It's 2009, I think, 2007, thereabout. All the information in it is perfectly good because it's based on tried and true how people get along. And the biggest part about it for me is it actually talks about conflict and how to deal with conflict, both as a leader and as a person within the magical group. And it's focused on magical groups, on spiritual groups, because we have different issues that come up all the time. I mean, in a business setting, the focus is capitalism and productivity and all those kinds of issues, which have their own problems. But in a spiritual group, you can't look at someone and say, "You're not pulling your weight, I'm firing you." I mean, you could. It's not going to get you very far, spiritually speaking. That's not good for their growth. It's not particularly good for your growth. And not all models of leadership should be the hierarchical ones, although many are. And many of us want them to be hierarchical because that's what we're used to in our mundane life. But we can do different things, spiritually speaking. My own group actually is a wheel. Started out as a hierarchy triangle, now it's a wheel, very flat. And it's I've found it really useful to offer to the community, and it's vaguely still available. Kind of wish it would go out of print so I can rewrite it and update it, but publishers still fine getting one or two books a year or something like that. But again, I think it's incredibly vital, and I don't actually know why people who are in groups or lead groups don't own it or haven't read it, because it's just incredibly foundational. And in fact, in
Well,
my cover, we read it every
I
year or two.
I can answer that actually because publishers are not connecting with the larger community. This is the biggest problem we see, and we're still seeing it today. That let's go ahead and talk about that. So you as an author have been out there. You're like one of the OGs out there. Yet the distribution and the knowledge of you. Now you've been spending some time. You moved to Portugal of all places. I hope you love it.
I do.
Uh, I do. And that moved you out of the American time zone for the biggest part. And that changed your relationship with the United States. Time zones really make a difference. I know I'm constantly dealing with time zones. When I found here in
You called
Portugal,
yourself a 24-hour man the other day when we were talking. You're like, "Hey, we can do it anytime. I'm 24 hours." And I was like, "Oh, that's terrible."
but I am. I mean, I do. And I get sleep. I sleep 6 to 8 hours. I just don't necessarily sleep them on the same time every day. But I get plenty of sleep. But it is hard. I mean, because I had to change the way I thought because I'm so caught up in the internet world, which is 24 hours if I want to be good to people. And that's why we're doing this at noon in America. Everybody goes, "Why are you doing it in America?" Because my friends in Europe, this is 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and they're getting something special. I mean, really special. And I'm really grateful for it out there because I'm trying to acknowledge who we are. But I do think part of the problem is that I hate to say it, but until you talked up like, oh my God, here we are. I've got a copy coming to me, and I've read it online. Virtual Pagan 2.0. But I who feel like I'm really knowledgeable didn't realize it was out there, and I apologize for that. I should have, but and we go way back. I should have been paying more attention. Um, and there is so much material coming out there. I think that now we're getting into the age. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit out of that. So, people out there. Somebody asked me when I get married in love or arranged marriage. I don't care. That's not this speech. We have a lot of different types of shows. We get kind of a weird thing, but in the idea that you feel like you're part of a cooperative system. So, I really think that one of the problems we've got, and I think Witchfox solved it for a while until it aged out, and that is the mesh. Where can we go in the mesh? I think we're going to hear a lot of terms about the mesh, which is a network of networks. You have your network, I have my network, I have like dozens of networks. Everybody has these networks, and the social transmitter is trying to emanate to as many of these nets simultaneously as we can. Right now I'm doing 15. I could go up, pay a little bit more to do 30. Pretty soon, I can backtrack into cable. I'm now on Roku. We're going to be on Amazon Fire. So for me, this is the chat room all over again. I mean, literally the same thing, except now we have control over how we vet. And the idea that this is telepathy. I mean, in every other way, other than we don't have a diode into our brains, we can visually, oral, talk all of it.
Yep.
This would be if we had two magic mirrors in the ancient days, they would call this magic.
Oh yeah. Oh no, absolutely. But actually, it is grounded in something technology we've already had.
Mm-hmm.
which you might hate me for saying, but it reminds me so much of the early days of cable
Mm-hmm.
when anybody basically could have a time slot to do a TV show. And sure, that might be 1:30 in the morning and you got half an hour, but you could do whatever you wanted with that half an hour, short of, anything illegal. And so, and that was reaching a whole new group of people
Mm-hmm.
in using technology that was already out there. So I think, kind of what you're doing, I think it clued to me when you said you were going to be on Amazon Fire, with the
Mm-hmm.
Roku and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's like TV all over again. It's like we really like our visuals.
So yes, people forget that I started in brokered radio. I was the pioneers into that. That was Psychic Chicago Radio, 1993, $75 an hour from 11 to midnight. Moved over to WVVX, 103.5 FM, and I bought that one for $120 an hour because the nightclubs were doing it on Saturday night. We would do readings on Saturday night on a
Love
hard
it.
rock station. So yeah, no, I used to buy time and we were on cable mixes. No, all this stuff people forget. I was into magazines when Xerox.
Cool.
So for one of my biggest growth in the '90s was Xerox, the Xerox machines, and this new system called Kinko's, where they were paying doing 1 or 2 cents a page to do magazines, and I distributed hundreds of Psychic Chicago magazines. Would become the roundtable for over 100
Oh
issues.
yeah. We all really need to have just a little moment of thank you, Kinkos, for being
Mm-hmm.
so inexpensive because so many people shared so much information
Mm-hmm.
from being able to distribute like that. Yes. Yes,
So now,
absolutely.
we're coming into a point I think that's going to be really important. Maybe we can. This is where we're going to get into a little of our own futurisms. Take everything we say. We've been right about a lot of this stuff, but I think the next thing is curation. I think ultimately, I think curated sites, they're semi-private or private, you pay a subscription to, are going to be. That's what Pagan World's becoming, is a lifestyle, but it's a curation sites that we're going to need really talk about that. And I think your foundation of virtual pagan will be, I think you'll be putting out 3.0 before too long, about this idea of now, I hate to say it, but gated communities, the side of
Yeah.
curation. And people think of it as a negative, but it's also a very big positive, because then at least the paradigm of that information is your paradigm. It shares it with other people. Hmm?
Right.
So what are your thoughts
Well,
on where it's going?
I I think you're right. I don't want you to be right.
Okay.
I'm gonna be a little I don't know. I'm gonna go in a different direction, which is that I really, really would like to see the early promise of the internet come back, which is open sharing, open source,
Mm-hmm.
freely available information, and I mean, it was a wild frontier in a lot of ways, but you didn't have borders. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
have, I mean, because the problem with gated communities is you start to become inwardly focused and you're always talking to the same people with each other, and it's really
Mm-hmm.
hard to reach outside. Gates are useful, but they do keep out ideas. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, I mean, it's absolutely true. The amount of vitriolic horridness that is available on the internet was completely not expected, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
love that. But I would rather a constant open sharing of ideas, not behind paywalls, um, because otherwise we're going to lose sight of what's going on in the world around us. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of that might come very much from the fact that, yes, now that I'm in Portugal, I do have a very different view of the world. And I often wrestle with what I call my American brain, which
Mm-hmm.
is my American brain took a lot of things for granted that sitting here from this perspective are not true, and we're simply assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I get my information from very different sources now, and they have their own biases and slants.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm learning a lot more about the world than I was aware of before. And I was an active, interested participant in learning about the world when I was back in America. Um, So it's I would like that for the internet. I'd like to go back to that. I would like to see a lot less monetization on the internet because it's really skewed the priorities. I mean, right now
All right.
it's like the opposite of the 2000 startup, basically, when people were pouring money into things that were just ideas and never had any place to go. And now it's like people are just pouring money into things that are only going to make money, not the stuff that just might be interesting to explore. I
I,
mean, we're running into AI, for example. You brought up Magic.ai. AI is really complicated, gnarly scenario and situation that has been monetized to death and is not ready for public consumption, really. And it's not actually AI. They're lying when they call it AI. It's extremely
machine
complicated.
learning.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Um, but everyone wants to be hot and cool, and cryptocurrency is another one of my favorites. Sort of like money is already extremely abstract. Creating a whole other kind of money that is the abstraction of money doesn't seem like a really good idea. And sure enough, here we are years later, and a lot of
Mhm.
people made a lot of money, and they're out with their money. And a lot of people have lost money, and it's a Ponzi scheme. It's an updated Ponzi scheme.
I always talk about because I've been in startups a number of times, and now I'm doing a real startup. I'm really paying attention, but I'm doing it as a not for profit. Um,
Mm,
Pagan World Projects Limited is a not for profit. So we are trying to earn income so that our people can be paid for the work they do. Because we've been
sure.
talking a lot about elder care, about resources, but it's at primary social transmitters. We try to get everybody's message out as we always have. We're going to do radio. We're going to do that. So in the sense of, I want to be that I agree with you. I want the information to be free. I want to push out as much information as we can constantly, and that's been my mo for the last 30 years. Is
Right.
Pagans Tonight Radio. I'm really getting on the edge. There's going to be some monetization because somebody has to pay the bills. I mean, it is expensive,
Absolutely. No, no. And I mean, I'm always in favor of
right?
fairness as far as that goes. It's just that,
But those gated communities can be very nuisance if they start, not working cooperatively. So I'm really agree with you that the best model, and I'm trying with social transmitters and things of that nature, and forums, and anybody can join for free. But Witch School still is that premise. Peggy Tonight's still on that premise. So while I'm talking
I'm a
about
life, I'm a lifetime member of Witch School. I was one of the
absolutely,
first people who bought a lifetime membership.
and people thought I was crazy when I offered those lifetime memberships for so little. Literally, when we began, it was $29, $29.99. I said, for how long? He says, as long as the site lasts. Today, 23 years later, it's still here, still pumping out people. I actually have the same offer for Pagan World Project right now. The exact same offer is to become a citizen, because where I want to go to with it is, instead of being a not for profit in the old world, I want to make it a digitalized autonomous organization, be held
Mm,
by its citizens here in the future. Now,
mm,
if I tell people this, they look at me like, you're going to build a school online. I mean, it's the same sort of energy I'm getting. It's like those blinders, but I know what I'm talking about. We want to be able to have citizenship and tokens, because we're going to be buying up a lot of virtual names. We're going to be buying products that are digital. And now, 30 years ago, if I was a little bit brighter about buying web names and things like that, I would have made a lot more money. There's a lot of things that we did before that we're going to see again. And I think that
mm,
this time, I want to see more pagans control it through a decentralized system. What does that mean? It means when we set up the rules, it will then ask for votes, and there's no error for like vote fraud or anything of that nature, because it's an automated system, and then it
mhm,
will enforce the rules of it. So if we put a budget before it saying, "Hey, it's going to cost us $10,000 to produce a show, this particular show. We're not sure if we should do it. Citizens, what do you think?" And if they say yes, then we produce it. If they say no, let us pass that one. I do think that's the big thing, that blockchain, and I know I'm talking like real like ooh magic, but that's where blockchain is. All these virtual assets. We don't realize how much of our assets, such as our images, our discussions, how we're going to summon the gods. All of this is going to be kind of caught in this big future copyright situation,
mm.
and that
Oh,
sort of thing.
you think copyright's going to come into it? Oh, that's fascinating.
I do. I think eventually these publishers can't afford it. These movie directors can't afford it. They're going to be trying to create systems that enforce. So there aren't Marvel memes that are not paying a tribute to Marvel. Music, we already see it in. Music has gotten really, really big, but there's huge organizations now making sure everybody gets paid. Spotify and all these kind of systems, right? I get if I even play even a minute of music, there's something called the Disney defense. So if a policeman feels like he's being recorded from the outside, he turns on the recorder that plays a Disney song.
Right.
They won't even stay online for less than a minute. I just got struck for an Oscar hit because we had somebody at the Oscar. I'm trying to clean up, so it's fast.
Interesting. Interesting. I know that as far as the policing goes, though, that is under attack as a defense
Right.
because it's been exploited as a way to hide illegal activity, and you're not
Mhm.
allowed to hide illegal activity. You can make a mistake and have somebody and have your little Oscar hit, but you can't deliberately play the music to cover up activity being held.
And
So
so I
it's
think all of
very
the, but I do think,
interesting.
but I do think copyright. So all these books are copywritten. And now, as they get into the database, Chat CPT, whatever it is, Fred, Tarot AI, which is mine, I actually own that name. I'm planning to build an AI tarot reader here next year. I've been waiting for
Wow.
years. I got databases, I got all of that. I just needed it. I just needed to get cheap enough that I could afford it. It's been $100,000 to build a persona online. Now it's come down to 10,000, and the company I'm talking with is actually talking about partner with me. The idea of having a tarot reader online using AI. So
Wow.
that's how fast we're moving. People are going to do that. We're going to see this sort of idea of it. But yeah, no, I think copyright's coming in. I think people should pay attention to their intellectual property. They should be paying attention to their rights. And ultimately, I want to create a DAO which controls I have 40 different pagan world names out in the internet, pagan world
Mm.
directory, so it can control that property and the idea of words being property. I think this is something people don't understand. Words are about to become far more property. You're not going to be able to say Nike quite the same way. Where every time
No.
you say Nike the God, you better be careful because Nike the trademark. Hmm?
Hmm.
Hmm?
Well, that'll be interesting. I'll say, I don't like your image of the world, Ed. I mean, I like part of it. I want you to see, I
Right.
want to see where you're going with things. But those kinds of restrictions are pretty much the opposite of what I want to have. I won't be surprised. I really, really won't. There's a uh, kind
Hmm.
of a terrible turning inward that seems to be happening. Um, Perhaps it's many, many decades of fear and a whole lot of crap going down in the universe
Hmm.
around us, physical universe. But people seem to be really turning in and huddling in, and not in a community based way of sharing resources and looking out
Hmm.
for one another. Um, but as one friend of mine says, but in the very end of the empire, get all you can before it goes bad,
So,
kind of a way.
yep. And so, why don't we go ahead and do this last exercise with you? Give us more of what you would like to see because we talk things into existence. I really do believe. So,
I
what would
yeah,
you like
I
to?
would go ahead. Sorry.
I would say, what would you like to see?
I I would really like to see more community based endeavors.
Hmm.
I'd really like to see the I'd really like to see a world where we don't all have to be social justice warriors just to
Hmm.
make basic amenities viable.
Hmm.
I I think it is entirely possible to have a universe, a world where people can exist and can decide how much they want to work, what kind of work they want to do. And if they don't want to work at something that produces something, i.e., they want to create art for the sake of creating art, I think that should be possible and necessary. And I think we have vast wealth in our to our fingertips. We really, really do. We are on a very rich planet. We are sucking our resources dry, some. And I think it must be terrible for the pagan community in particular, because since the 50s, the 60s, we have all been deeply, deeply loud about the fact that this is terrible what is going on in our world. And we're still being told that that's just not scientific, except the scientists are telling us the same thing. So, I'm one of those people though who also has great faith in the fact that the Earth will continue to exist long after humans have killed themselves off. So I have, but what will the gods do without us?
Well,
You know?
I do have. I always think about the dinosaur gods. Those sort of things. What did they worship? And those sort of energies of life. But Gaia will be here no matter what. I do think part of our human motivation. I tell people that we're kind of the bees of space. I think one aspect of us is that there is this compulsion to get us off planet as fast as we can, and we're starting to see the acceleration of it. Our brains are working together. They're messing together, around to kind of throw things into space. I mean, we've already planted a seed on the moon. China did, and it actually
Mhm.
grew for about a second. We got two little leaves. So this idea of propagation of the plant, I do think that there is this sort of wonderful global kind of mind of kind of fixing the problems. I think it's generational, and I think that's where pagans really need to root themselves now into the idea of becoming terraformers or planetologists and working with the sensors and kind of working with the idea of the Gaia mind and kind of bringing more life into the world. I do think that that's a great career path that I think we're going to see for a lot of pagans. I certainly hope so. The biology and where these sort of systems merge in
Mhm.
order to keep life, because I think life is very valuable. If you don't think so, if you want one tip of what you should invest in for 20 years, honey. Honey lasts
Honey.
forever. Honey, if pagans really want to make money, honey is my biggest belief. It's commoditized, not separated like chocolate, like coffee. All these things are
Right.
commodities, but honey tastes different where it's harvested, every single one. And even from wine, it has more akin to wine than it does anything. And guess what? It stores longer than wine. It lasts thousands of years. Hmm?
And and supporting the honeybees is only a good thing for propagating our own species
Hmm.
because they in
Right.
fact pollinate all over. So
And
I
and
think
and
that's very clever. Hmm.
and the DNA in it is going to be essential for them to trace it. So if you store it properly, it'll also contain DNA, which when we get back to the other side of these problems, we'll be able to trace some of that back. So honey, folks, if you want to make a lot of money, honey, start selling your honey. Now I'm putting labels on it. I've got a whole conversation about this coming. But through the mesh of the internet, I'm not talking nonsense anymore.
Nope.
It, we could really build something like that. And I think there's a
Yep.
thousand products we have.
Hmm.
So I think we should look at our resources in that aspect. And I think that's
Yep.
coming. I think both of our visions share that and that idea. And mine, I prefer yours over mine. Okay. So last two questions for you. One, how's it living in Portugal?
uh,
I have a,
Portugal is so amazing. Sorry. You
mhm.
have a friend here, or
Oh no, I'm just curious. I want to travel out there. We have friends like Chris Copeland. We have our friends in Greek at Casanosas. We have the European aspects of it, and Chris Copeland's actually an American that went over there and has fallen in love with the Netherlands and all that area compared to the
Mhm.
American culture. She finds it a better, more supportive culture for her. Hmm.
Yep, yep. I have to say, I feel very much that way. I happen to live in a city that is very, very Catholic. It is the foundation of the Catholic religion here in Portugal. So I'm surrounded by churches, and yet, no one ever talks about religion. There is no proselytization. There's no, of course you're a Catholic. No, 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 no. They don't have that. It's an
Hmm.
enormously socially, literally democratic country.
Hmm.
They live a lot of the promises that us Americans had thought we were living over the
Hmm.
years. Which is not to say that there are not, it's not perfect. There are still problems, but it's refreshing in many, many
Hmm.
ways. The lifestyle is lovely. The food is great. It's far less expensive. I don't have to have a car to exist here, which is lovely,
Hmm.
and um, and I can afford the healthcare.
So we have to look at some of this, folks, but that's another story at another time. I just love to hear it. Visit Portugal, go out and visit her. So the last thing I have is to you. We've got your books out there. How can we support you in this? That I think it's time. I think it's time for you to kind of start letting your opinions be wider known. We're going to help you do that. But
Yeah.
how can we support you?
You buy my books, that'd be great. I actually have another book that literally just came out this last year, October, November of last year, which is A Witch's Guide to Crafting Your Practice, which is a beginner book. It's my first beginner
Mm.
book. It is literally for everyone who wants to create a spiritual practice, kind of is interested in witchcraft, but basically is completely overwhelmed with the enormous amount of information and contradictory information that's now available. And it's just 5 things you can do that you will not get wrong, and you will create your own spiritual practice. And it will be in a witchcraft model, but isn't actually that. I talk about how you don't have to have deity,
Hmm.
or you do can have deity, and maybe your deity doesn't have a gender, and maybe you don't either. And things that aren't necessarily much talked about in general witchcraft, actually. And then you can start asking publishers when it is that I'm going to publish my next book, which is probably going to be coming out this year. It's travel magic.
Ooh.
All the of magic by location. And travel is already amazing and wonderful for provoking you into a new headspace and a new view of the world, quite literally. This book is how to consciously do that, to create a new reality while you travel. And it's so much more than
Oh,
just how to have an altar in your pocket or anything like that. It's why you want to call on Poseidon when you're taking the ferry rather than Neptune, for example.
I
And
need this book. I
it's
need
it
this.
is.
When's it
I'm pretty
coming out?
happy with it. So
When's it coming out?
it doesn't have a publisher yet, so I'm probably going to self-publish it. So look for it this summer,
Okay.
basically. Yes.
Because I've got I'm once I leave here to go to St. Louis, and then I have a plane ticket with Frontier Airline for a year.
Ooh,
I can go anywhere I choose to, anytime I choose to, just pay the
ooh.
taxes and luggage. I have literally,
Okay.
and then I have other systems. So I'm actually, as soon as I leave here, I'm going on the road for almost a year to kind of promote all of this. And
Oh, nice.
it's called the Pagan Show, my reality show, because I've always believed in that. So I need your book. Uh, there you go, publishers. Hmm. And so, I guess it is. So Lisa McSherry .com. Go to her website. That's probably the fastest way to connect to her world. And we're going to hear more from you. I want to start having some of these conversations again, because I think you still have a lot to offer this next round of it. Because I think we're back into the game. But I still think we're back right back at the beginning. You know,
I think so.
I
It's
think so.
exciting.
It is
It's a
exciting.
really exciting time.
And I'm really super pleased that we were able to do this. So we haven't talked in a long time, and now Spirit has a way to provide your community with the best advice. You've heard the yin,
Definitely.
and you heard the yin and the yang today from two old guard that have been doing this for a while. And let's hope. I hope your side wins more than mine, but we'll see how much of mine comes to be that we can have to fight that system, because I think ultimate information does have to be free.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has been so much fun to do this, Ed. It was perfect.
And so, everybody, we are going to end this stream and go back to your regular programming on Roku, and you'll be able to see this throughout the internet today and days to come. Maybe a generation from now. We'll see. Peace.